Hey guys, welcome back. So, as always, just a huge thank you to everyone who's been liking, sharing, subscribing, and I really, everything you guys are doing is just really appreciated. So, please leave any comments. Feel free to suggest any cases. I always get back to you, I'm always reading the comments. And if you can give me any sort of feedback or anything, it's always appreciated. So, I know on my channel and a lot of other channels, we tend to really focus a lot on men in these cases. And truth be told, it's obviously it is always seemed to be men that are the perpetrators in these cases. And B, if it is a woman, it doesn't really get the recognition um, that it should do if the case was led by a man. So I've just been doing a little bit of digging, trying to find a couple of cases where women were the perpetrators, and I'm wanting to mainly focus on uh, cases where it was just solely a woman. It wasn't a woman and a man, so obviously nothing like Fred and Rose or the one that I did on Paul Clark and Lorraine Thorpe. So today's case, I am going to be talking about Tracie Andrews. So obviously, if you guys were around or old enough to be born in the 80s or early 90s, you may remember the Catatonia song Road Rage. This story is what Keris Matthews wrote that song about. So please sit back and listen to the true story of Tracie Andrews, the road rage killer. So, as always, I sort of like to go back to the beginning. So, who was Tracie Andrews? So, Tracie Marguerite Andrews, she was born the 9th of April 1969, and she was born to the middle child of 3 siblings. And she later down the line ended up with various step siblings. So Tracie lived and grew up in Birmingham at the time of her arrest, and at the time of her arrest, she lived in a small village called Alvenchurch, which is a really tiny village on the north border of Birmingham. Her parents, Irene and John, they were said to have had a really dysfunctional marriage, and this marriage was often described as really volatile. And her father, to John, he actually ended up leaving the family home around the time that Tracie was 8 years old. And Tracie said that her father leaving left a really long-lasting impression on her. And after leaving school, Tracie worked as a hairdresser for a short while, and she then started getting aspirations on becoming a model, and she actually had a professional portfolio made of her. And I've seen the pictures, and for all intents and purposes, if you didn't know Tracie's character, she is a really photogenic person. Obviously, if you knew her character, you would see just her character shining out through these photos. I've seen the photos. They are online, so you can have a look for yourself. But while she had these aspirations, again, this portfolio made, she actually began working as a barmaid at her local pub, the Red Lion. And she gained a lot of attention from the punters, because she was this young, slim, busty blonde barmaid. The stereotype of when you go to a pub and you have a barmaid, that's a stereotype that you form in your head. Or maybe back in the day, not so much now. In 1990, aged just 21, Tracie was in a relationship with a man called Andy. and the couple went on to have their daughter Carla. But the 4 year relationship then ended not long after this, and Andy said the main reason was that Tracie was quite an aggressive and violent person. He also said that she would react with anger with the smallest things. So while on a night out in 1994, at a nightclub in Birmingham, Tracie meets 23-year-old Lee Harvey for the first time. And it was said that the two just basically had an instant connection, and an instant attraction. So let's just talk a little bit about the victim in this case, Lee Harvey. So Lee was born as Lee Raymond Dean Harvey on the 20th of September 1971 in Kings Norton, sorry. I couldn't read my handwriting there. In Birmingham. And Lee was described as a family man, and growing up he had aspirations to be a bus driver, and this was something that he actually achieved in his adult life. So he was in his late teens, early 20s, actually became and fulfilled his dream. And like Tracie, Lee also had a daughter from a previous relationship, and her name was Danielle, or is Danielle, sorry. And he was said to have been a devoted dad to Danielle, and still had a really close relationship with the mother. And he was also said to be extremely close to his parents, Maureen and Ray, and his sister Michelle. So just that's all the information I could find out about Lee, unfortunately. I would love to have told you more, but obviously there's just only so far back that I can go back in records. So Lee and Tracie, like, so obviously back to this night in 1994 when they first meet, they actually spend the night together, and the relationship starts to progress extremely quickly. And within 4 months, they were actually living together. And not long after this, obviously, because they don't know each other really, like, you can't really get to know someone within a 4 month period to know what they're like and around the house, and just get to know that person inside and out. And very, very quickly, obviously, the relationship starts to turn volatile. So Tracie and Lee, they are just constantly rowing, and this was just down to a really petty thing. So Tracie was jealous of Lee's relationship with his daughter's mother, and in turn, Lee started acting like really jealous around Tracie's relationship with her daughter's father, Andy. And the two were often heard saying that the other one had feelings for their ex and so on. So just a really, mundane, really childish stuff that two people in a sort of volatile relationship throw at each other. And it's, like I said, obviously they moved in together, not got to know each other, and obviously they're just clashing over the most petty and ridiculous things. Because if you sit down and think about it, those relationships ended for a reason, and now these two are meant to be together in this united, blended family. So Tracie didn't also like that Lee's family didn't like her. They actually spoke out and said they didn't like how Tracie was really, really controlling, and said that she was really self-obsessed and arrogant. And this sort of thing does crop up a lot more down the line during the story, so bear that in mind about Tracie's character. And due to this constant rowing, Tracie and Lee, they would often be seen ending the relationship, and Lee would end up moving back in with his mum and dad, and then eventually further down the line he him and Tracie would make up, he would move back into Tracie's, and this just turned into a perpetual cycle for the next year and a half, 2 years. So one particular argument got so heated that Tracie actually picked up Lee's belongings in a black bin liner, and she just threw the whole contents out the window. And another night, Tracie said that she had planned a night out with her girlfriends and that they were actually going to go to a nightclub. And she told Lee that she didn't want to see him there and to go do his own thing. And however, Lee doesn't listen and he ends up going to the same nightclub that Tracie happens to be out with her friends. And Tracie ends up seeing red because she feels that Lee is taking too long talking to the barmaid of the nightclub. Bearing in mind you're in a nightclub, I don't know if you guys have ever been to a nightclub, but it's really difficult to try and get your order in because you've got ear-splitting music in the background and a ton of other people surrounding you all chatting to their friends. So you have to really lean over the bar and obviously get quite close with the bar person to get your order through, and that's probably all he was doing. It was just probably taking a little while, but no, not in Tracie's head. In Tracie's head, Lee fancies the barmaid and she is like a ball to a red flag, and she causes such a scene and actually assaults Lee in the middle of the bar. So she starts slapping, she's scratching and biting him. And one of Lee's friends said it looked as if someone had taken a bite out of an apple, but they had not fully taken away the flesh. And despite the incident, Tracie and Lee end up being engaged. So not long after, obviously, this whole incident, and she's literally taken a chunk out of him. Lee end up proposing to Tracie, and in his head he probably thought that it would put an end to all the rowing arguments if they could put on a united front and so on and so forth, and actually be a family unit, that it would put to bed all of this jealousy. And while attending a family barbecue, Tracie decides that's the day that she's going to announce to the whole of Lee's family that they are in fact engaged. And all of a sudden, Lee's sister Michelle, she decides to stand up and says that she has her own announcement. She's actually got engaged to her long-term partner. And most of us, or all of us that have half a brain cell, we would just see that as, a coincidence sort of thing, or, just down to a bit of shit luck. But not Tracie, no. She sees it as the fact that Michelle is trying to steal her limelight and has got engaged because she knew that Tracie was engaged, even down to the fact that Lee had not told anyone in his family at this point about their engagement. And again, Tracie just causes a massive scene at this family barbecue. She's saying there's a plot against her and Lee, and more tension starts rearing its head when it's discussed about Tracie's daughter Carla and whether she'll be a bridesmaid at Michelle's wedding. And Tracie says that she and Carla won't actually be attending the wedding, and that Lee is actually not allowed to go either. So again, her possessive, controlling nature is really, really shining out to the family. She then tells Lee that if he does go, that obviously they will be over. And Lee, he sadly, obviously probably just to keep the peace between him and his partner at the time, he agrees sadly that he's not going to attend his own sister's wedding. And after this, Lee's family have nothing more to do with Tracie. They completely cut her out. And not long after, Tracie discovers that she's pregnant with her and Lee's child. And I want to put a little trigger warning into this because I know miscarriages and abortion are a really touchy subject for many women who are listening, maybe some men as well, but more so women. So I just want to put a little warning out there for you. So obviously Tracie discovers that she's pregnant, and she and Lee, they decide to put the past behind them. But 2 months later, Tracie actually suffers a miscarriage, and this is after she's gone out into town just to do a bit of shopping, and she says that she fell down some stairs, and obviously she's fallen on the front, and this has brought on a miscarriage. So Lee's family then put their personal feelings to one side to help Tracie and Lee, and Tracie and Lee, they basically fall back into this volatile circle of arguing, breaking up, moving out, getting back together again. And one particular day during a massive row, it actually comes out that Tracie never had a miscarriage. She had actually gone out that day to have an abortion. And despite this absolute betrayal, absolute failure of trust, Lee stays with her. And this brings us to the night of Sunday, the 1st of December 1996. So obviously at this point, Tracie and Lee have been together for about 2 years, and obviously they're not married as of yet, but they're engaged. I do apologise, I'm so sorry guys. So obviously they're not married yet, but they are still engaged. And this one particular day, so Tracie is planning to have a day out with Carla, obviously her daughter, and Lee's daughter Danielle. And Lee says that he would take Danielle back to her mum Anita's after. So Tracie then starts another massive row in front of the children, I'll add. And she just basically flips out over this suggestion that Lee is going to take his daughter back to her mother's house, and saying that Lee and Anita are basically starting an affair behind her back. And after the row, the pair then calm down. Obviously, Carla, I assume at this point, has gone back to her dad's, and Danielle has gone back to Anita's. The pair, so Lee and Tracie, they end up going into the Marlbrook pub in Bromsgate, and they have a few drinks, just having a little bit of a laugh and whatnot, what an average couple do in the pub. And they then leave the pub at 9:45 p.m. and they get into the car and start driving. And this journey, it was proven to only have taken 10 minutes at most, but 1 hour later they are still on this little narrow, really tiny country road. You know the roads I'm talking about, the really long, winding, narrow country roads. What should have been a 10-minute journey, and an hour later they're still on this road. And it was believed that the argument that they had earlier in the day about Anita had started up again in the car, and they had pulled up. And at 10:45, so like an hour later, the residents at a nearby cottage, they could hear screaming, and they looked out of their window to see what was going on. And they could see Lee and Tracie, and they said that they could see that she was holding Lee, and that he was bleeding really heavily. And they immediately called the police, and the police arrived fairly quickly at the scene, and Lee is basically pronounced dead at the scene on arrival. So in total, Lee had actually been stabbed 42 times. So this was in his neck, in his chest, and quite a lot in his back. And one of the wounds, being the fatal blow, had severed an artery in his neck. So when the officers checked over Tracie, she only basically had like really superficial cuts and bruises, a few on her face. But other than this, she seemed absolutely fine. But obviously, Tracie being Tracie, she's not being the centre of attention. You know, they're more worried about the man that's dead on the scene. This isn't good enough for Tracie, you know. So she starts acting like really hysterical. And she says that she's struggling to remember some of the details. She is then taken to a hospital, and it's noticed by the hospital staff that she's acting really, really suspicious. They take note that she was taking unnatural, frequent trips to the toilet. And remember that detail actually, because that comes up again later. So it might just seem like insignificant now, but it actually is quite an important detail. So at 1 a.m, Tracie is then taken to Redditch police station for questioning. And Tracie says that they left the pub at 9:45 and they were driving down the country roads, and a car actually came and pulled up behind them, and they were tailgating. So tailgating, obviously, for those of you who don't drive, it's when you follow a car too closely, and you're speeding up quite a significant amount and putting up really, really close behind the car in front of you. So she said that, yeah, the car was completely tailgating them and then backing off, coming back forwards, backing off again. The car was flashing its lights, bipping its horn, and Lee apparently gets really annoyed and pulls over on the side, and the car then pulls up behind him. And Lee and the driver then get out of their respective cars, and Tracie basically says that they just basically started fighting and arguing in the middle of the road. And Lee then goes to return to his car, and the driver does the same. So apparently this altercation just happened within minutes. They've said a few choice words and separated. But then Tracie then says that the passenger of the other car gets out and attacks Lee, and she said that she's jumped out of her side of the car in this way to protect Lee, and the passenger apparently called her a slut and punched her in the face, and which explained obviously the superficial bruising under her eye, and obviously as she's fallen down, that explained the cuts that she sustained. So he then gets back into the car and he drives off, and Tracie said that she was then able to get back up and see Lee, and she could see how badly that he had been injured. So when asked to describe the attacker, Tracie said that he was an older looking man wearing a donkey jacket, and the other, so that was apparently the driver, and the other one was basically just a fat man with really staring, bulging eyes. And when asked about the other car, she said that the car was a dark blue Ford Sierra. And police get suspicious because when they actually go to the scene to investigate further in the daylight, they could see that there was no evidence of any other car. So obviously, again, that's going to come up a little bit later. And they also get suspicious when Tracie says that she couldn't remember any of these details at the particular time. So when they start looking at Tracie's clothing, and they could see a lot of significant blood splatter. And when asked, Tracie said that it must have come from when she was checking Lee over, and at one point she had actually held Lee like a baby and cradled him. Um, but the police, they basically know, they've worked in these fields for a long time. They've seen a lot. They can tell what is blood splatter from an attacker and from when you're holding someone who is bleeding quite heavily. And Lee's family are also really suspicious. They all said that Lee wasn't a violent or confrontational man at any point during his life. And a few days later, and this is probably one of the most infamous. Sorry, guys. So this is probably like one of the most infamous bits from this case. So a conference call is sorry, not call. A conference program is held, and Tracie is brought forward onto this, and this is just basically what they do when they want to try and jog someone's memory, and they want the perpetrators to come forward for the investigation. So Tracie, she's then asked to speak out, and at first she shows a bit of hesitant, but then she decides to go, and Tracie then starts to retell her story, and at this point, obviously, if you were too upset, you would probably find it very difficult, you would break down, but not Tracie. She starts staring into the camera, and she is directly speaking to the apparent driver of this other car. And she starts saying that he isn't the wanted party, only his passenger is, and that they wouldn't be in any kind of trouble for coming forwards. The journalists at the conference were taken aback about how confident Tracie was appearing, and this was only because usually at these sort of conferences, they have to really press and prompt the person that's being interviewed. And they start asking their questions, and one journalist says the timelines don't add up. And as stated, obviously, Tracie's home's only a 10-minute drive from the pub. And so yeah, Tracie's house was only a 10-minute drive from the pub, but this attack happened 1 hour after she said that they had left the pub. And Tracie just basically, she can't reply to this, and she goes really silent, and the police then ends the conference there, but they're watching and they know that something's going on. So on the 4th of December, 1996, Tracie is then admitted back into hospital after a apparent suicide attempt. So she's found after taking an overdose, and she's actually left a suicide note addressed to her daughter. And in this note, she expresses that she couldn't live without Lee anymore. But she's actually found after taking the overdose and her stomach is pumped. And while Tracie is in her recovery, the police, they begin making more breakthroughs with the case. So another couple, they actually end up coming forward to say that on the 1st of December, they were also driving on the same road, and that they actually saw Lee and Tracie, and that they said that Lee and Tracie basically stood out to them. So Lee's car was actually a white Ford Escort, and this stuck out like a sore thumb in the night. So obviously, bearing in mind, obviously December, a white car would really stick out in the darkness. But they did say that they didn't see a dark Ford Sierra whatsoever during their travel up this road. They said that obviously they were paying close attention, because on these roads you have to really pay attention, because like I said, obviously they're long, winding, usually dark, like there's no street lights whatsoever on these roads, so you really do have to pay close attention to what you're doing. And a white car, like I said, it would stick out like a sore thumb. And what they could see was that Lee was actually struggling to drive in a straight line. Another witness said that she also lived really, really close to this road, and that she could hear two people arguing, and so it was definitely a male and female voice, and it wasn't two men. So on the 7th of December, while still in the hospital for treatment, Tracie is then arrested for Lee's murder. And Tracie is then re-interviewed for a second time, and she's actually released on bail. So she tries, in this interview, she tries to stick to the story that she gave in the first place about this road rage attack. But the police, obviously, they don't believe her whatsoever. The press attention for the case was really, really growing, and the paparazzi started following every footstep that Tracie was making, and in the press they were reporting it as the road rage case. So obviously I'm going to go back to the night of the 1st of December 1996. So the true story was that Tracie had stabbed Lee, like I said, 42 times with a Swiss Army knife. And one of these stabs, it had punctuated the artery in Lee's neck, and this was able to be explained from the blood splatter that was on Tracie's clothing. And further examination of Tracie's clothing, police actually found a penknife shaped blood stain in her boot, and police believed that she actually carried it in her boot to the hospital, and they then believed that Tracie had actually disposed of the knife in the hospital. So obviously, like I said earlier, the doctors and nurses, they took a note of Tracie's frequent trips to the bathroom. So obviously the police believe that Tracie had disposed of the knife down the toilet, and she was making frequent trips to go back to check that it had actually gone. So examinations of the road, like I said, and the examinations of the police car supported the police's belief. So they couldn't find any evidence of a second car that had taken over Lee's. So they noted that the road was, like I said, a single lane, meaning that the car would have had to gone over a grass verge. But having a look at the grass verges, like, there was no tyre indents whatsoever that you would typically see if what she had said was true. And examining Lee's body, the pathologist couldn't see any defensive wounds on him whatsoever, so obviously he never had a chance to put his hands in front of his face or any other part of his body to protect himself. And most of the stab wounds were actually in his back. They also found 80 strands of Tracie's hair in Lee's hand, so this supported the witness statements of Arel, and a pathologist said that the amount of hair would need to have been taken by considerable force. So again, we're going to come back to that in a bit. My belief is obviously Lee, after the first maybe couple of stabs, depending how quick she was stabbing him, he's obviously got hold of her hair to try and defend himself maybe, and obviously there was some sort of struggle as she's continued stabbing him, and as he's let go, obviously he's taken a clump of her hair with him. Obviously I'm not saying that's what actually happened, it's just something that I believe had happened that night. So the trial begins on the 1st of July 1997 at Birmingham Crown Court. So all the evidence was put forward by the prosecution, and they were able to deconstruct all of Tracie's lies within minutes. And it was said that it had been actually 7 minutes between Lee being stabbed and him being found by the resident of the cottage. And at this time, Tracie had not made any attempt to get away and get help from anyone. Police said that Tracie had tried to leave the car when the row took place, and after this, Tracie had taken the knife out from the glove compartment, and she stabbed Lee as he turned his back to go to the other car. And Tracie's mum, Irene, she spoke out, and she said that she couldn't understand why Tracie had invented such an implausible story. And it's, your daughter is a liar, maybe, and she's one of those people that just can't own up to what she's done, and she's trying to deflect the blame to maybe, she knows she's going to get in some sort of trouble, but she's thinking, I might get in less trouble if I go with this story, because she just can't, in her selfish mind, she doesn't want to spend time in prison for a crime that she has committed, but she wants everyone to think that she's the real victim in this story. So Tracie was actually found guilty of murder on the 29th of July 1997, with a recommendation that she would serve 14 years imprisonment. So she was initially sent to HMP Foston Hall and later sent to HMP Send, and eventually sent to Arscombe Grange. So a year into her sentence, Tracie, she starts beginning an appeal process, and she states that she was a miscarriage of justice, and this was down to the damaging publicity that the appeal was, that her case had garnered. Thankfully, this appeal was denied, and Tracie actually refused to attend the hearing of her appeal case. So Lee's sister Michelle said at the time, "I just want the bitch to rot in hell. She wouldn't show her face today. She knows she's not getting out. I think she should hang." Maureen and Ray, so Lee's parents, they also spoke out, and Maureen said, "I still believe life should mean life. I'm happy with the result. Justice has been done." And Ray added that, "We want to draw a massive line under Tracie Andrews and pretend that she never existed, and we want to rebuild our lives. She should stay where she is. The last 2 years have been an enormous burden. She knows what she did, and the world knows too." Irene and John, they both, so obviously Tracie's parents, they refused to speak out in defence of Tracie, because how can you defend the indefensible? They know their daughter was guilty. They know what their daughter was like, so it was only natural that they just had no words for the press at this point. So in April 1999, Tracie, she actually puts a statement out, and this statement, she admits to her guilt finally, but with a twist. She states in this that she killed Lee in an act of self-defence. So obviously we're going back to the part with obviously where he had a clump of her hair in his hand, and in this letter she claims that he was been abusing her over a amount of time. And I'm not saying it's not true, it could be, but in this case, like, hearing about Tracie's character, I don't know if I believe her or not. We'll leave it up to you guys, but she could be telling the truth, but the fact that she's lied throughout this whole story, and even lied about having a miscarriage, I'm struggling to believe anything that this woman says. So around this time, the Welsh rock band Catatonia, so led by Cerys Matthews, they released the song Road Rage in April 1998, and this was actually partially inspired by the case. So about 10 years after Lee's murder, his mum Maureen, she released a book in 2007, and she at the time spoke out about the release of Road Rage, and she said that it's disgusting that people are trying to make money from such a tragedy. Lee didn't die in a road rage attack. He was murdered by Tracie Andrews. We don't need songs like this. So Maureen reflects on the release of the song in her book in 2007, and she said that after her original statement was put out in the press, Cerys Matthews actually reached out to her and called her personally, and Cerys actually apologised and said that she didn't want to cause offence to Maureen or the family about the song, and she explains that the song was partially about advances in technology, but partly about how Tracie had actually gone crazy and she hadn't done herself any favours. And I think obviously if you re-listen to the song, that does come across a little bit. I've listened to the song fairly recently, quite a few times, and that sort of statement does come across quite strong in the lyrics. But obviously art is subjectional to everyone, so if you guys remember the song or you still listen to the song, let me know what your interpretation of those lyrics are. I'll be interested to know. So Maureen added in this book that she hadn't stopped visiting Lee's grave in the 10 years, and she regularly would shout at the gravestone, asking him why he ended up staying with Tracie for so long. And then back to Tracie, and this one was a fairly new thing to me to discover. So while serving her sentence, Tracie actually requested to have lifelong anonymity granted to her, and thankfully this was denied by the Ministry of Justice. And do you guys know where she got the idea for lifelong anonymity? While in prison serving her sentence, Tracie actually became friends with Maxine Carr, and Maxine had given Tracie the idea while giving Tracie a makeover in the prison. And to continue on with her sort of makeover process, Tracie ended up, while she was still serving her time, I'll add, in November 2009, Tracie had a £5,000 jaw reconstruction through the NHS. And I get that the NHS, they have an oath, you know, that they have to treat everyone the same. And obviously, if there was something wrong with her jaw that was endangering her health, then I see the point of getting it done. But like I said, obviously knowing how vain and self-centered Tracie was or is as a person, I can't see it being done for any other reason than for beauty standards or vanity. That was the word I was trying to look for. So Tracie was actually released in July 2011, and one of her conditions was that she was not allowed within a 25-mile radius of Lee's family, and this unfortunately meant that she wasn't allowed to actually stay with her mum, and she wasn't allowed to stay with her daughter Carla. because they lived within that radius of Lee's family. So Carla was now 21, and she was actually a mother herself. So Tracie is now a grandmother. And they instead had to go out of their way to visit Tracie after her release. And the press attention due to this release, it did not stop. Like, she yet again was getting snapped, going about her day. Stories were coming out that while she was serving her time, she had a really bad shopping addiction. People were actually sending her money, and she was able to spend it however she wanted and whatever she wanted. In not long after her release, obviously Tracie goes about obviously trying to change her identity as much as she could. So she, by deed poll, she changes her name to Tia Carter. And later on, she changed it again to Jenna Stevens. In 2017, she marries a bouncer called Phil Goldsworthy, and she actually ends up adding his surname to her new name, so she becomes Jenna Smith Goldsworthy. And even on her Hindu, paparazzi follow her to Butlins. I can't remember what location it was, but they end up snapping shots of her at Butlins. And Tracie, as per usual, she's centre of attention in the whole building, standing there dressed as Sexy Copper. So when the plans for Tracie's release, they were announced, a former inmate, an ex-girlfriend of Tracie, spoke out and said that Tracie had formed multiple relationships while serving her sentence, and time again her possessive and controlling nature would come through in these relationships. So obviously we all are familiar with the term gay for stay, and it's a very common thing where women will form a relationship with another woman in their prison, and men will do the same in their respective prison. And I think it's just a way of getting a bit of comfort that you can't get from obviously the opposite sex, unless obviously you've got a corrupt officer who is seeing the inmates. It's more easy for them to forge a relationship with one of their fellow prisoners. So this woman, she spoke out and said that one day she was actually just standing there having a general chit chat and conversation with an ex-girlfriend of hers who she stayed on a good relationship with. And Tracie then basically come up and attacked and assaulted this woman, and this resulted in this woman receiving quite substantial treatment to treat these wounds that Tracie had inflicted. And this woman said that, so Tracie's ex-girlfriend, sorry, she spoke out and said that she was really opposed to Tracie's release, and she warned the public that Tracie Andrews is still capable of murder. So that brings us to the end of that story. I tried to go as deep as I could with the information that I could find. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Please give me a like, share and subscribe. I'd really love to know your thoughts and feelings on this case. If you've got any other information that you want to add, let me know. And I will see you guys next Friday for the next true crime story with Silhouette. And yeah, just stay safe, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Take care.